So my name is Mike Tallhammer. I'm the Chief of Physics for Centura Health, which is a health system in the state of Colorado. We have 4 facilities in the Denver area, which is where I'm primarily based, that have SGRT outfits on all of their Linacs. We're using it for 100% of our patient treatments at the moment. And I've been asked to kind of give a general talk about SGRT as a standardized solution, what that means, and what we feel are some unique benefits that each patient gets by being able to take part in a kind of an SGRT program. So with that being said, these are my disclosures. We'll go on to, this is kind of a big picture type of talk, so we're gonna walk before we run. See the picture, how it all tied together there? All right, come on guys, you're killing me over here. All right, so they've asked me to kind of talk about what is SGRT. So when we think about SGRT and when we do evaluations at Centura Health, we do an evaluation of all the SGRT vendors every 3 to 4 months, which seems excessive. But SGRT is growing rapidly, so I like to kind of reach out to users that are new users and kind of see how they're using the systems, whether they're using any one of the vendors, what they're using it for. So we do it about every 3 to 4 months so that we can kind of gather data on usages of the system. I talked to a few people today after our TG302 meeting and learned some even new stuff that I've missed even over the last 3 months. And so what is SGRT? If you ask the vendors, you usually get some really cool flyer that looks like this. You also get language that says it's a paradigm shift. And anytime I hear it's a paradigm shift, anytime a sales guy is talking to me, the little buzzers and things go off in my head. I don't know if I'm too skeptical or what's going on. But when you see a flyer like this and it says SGRT and you see things like, there's a full face mask. Oh, wait a minute, his entire body is covered with a t-shirt and the only surface I find is the tops of his feet, you tend to be a little bit skeptical. And so I hear people, they come in, they've had these presentations and they come in and they tell me, hey, I don't believe that the surface correlates to the internal target position. And I say, yes, you do. Everybody is probably familiar with one of these types of things. We use surface tattoos in many of our clinics. I don't think I'd be like really too I don't know, how would I put it? I'm not being too controversial in saying that we're probably all using some sort of temporary or permanent skin marks. We use marks on immobilization devices that we feel are conforming to the patient anatomy. We also do combinations of those things. So if you have vac-lock bags and you're trying to treat an extremity or something like that, you're putting marks on the bag, you're putting marks on the mask. You also tattoo the patient so you can see the relative position of the patient inside the immobilization and then the relative position of that proper posture to the isocenter. And so we're all used to doing these types of things. So I tell everyone, you are using surface guided radiation therapy. It's not necessarily a paradigm shift in what you're doing. You're just using really tiny pieces of the surface. So surface guided radiation therapy, for the sake of this talk, is a technique that essentially we're using stereo vision technology to visualize a 3D reconstructed surface of the patient. So we're no longer using 3 individual points or 4 points or 5 points or alignment marks and then shift 2 marks. And I've been to a lot of different centers as a consultant I've seen red, blue, purple marks. I've seen black, white, or black and the, the UV marks and all the crazy things that we try to do in radiation oncology. What surface guided radiation therapy does for us is it gives us a technology that can be used in many different ways. So it can be used as a setup tool to speed up our setups and do it in a more accurate fashion by giving us more reference points along the surface. It can be used as a way to augment our existing IGRT process, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just a minute. Reduce the need for immobilization and excessive imaging to set up patients. This is, again, goes to more of the augmentation of IGRT. It can be used as a motion management device. So if you're looking at doing gating on the treatment machine or you're looking at doing 4D CT acquisition at your CT side, these surface guided radiation therapy technologies can be used in those aspects as well. And it can also be used as a process quality improvement tool, which we've all heard of the alternative payment models that are coming. And if you're a board certified physicist in the room, as I'm sure there are some, you're painfully familiar with PQI projects and all the good things that we're asked to do. We're going to be asked to do more and more of these things as we're looking at quality and reducing variation and standardization across not only treatment sites, but across institutions as well. And so these systems are uniquely set up that way. This is my 8-year-old son to show that these are completely safe. There's no ionizing radiation. So we're going to go through real quick, what is SGRT? So we can easily see that there's postural changes, and I don't know if I say easily see because I say that and then I'm not sitting where you are. Can you easily see the purple structure up there? And then you see the green structure up there. We can see that I'm sorry? It's pink. Quiet, Dawn. It's purple. Okay, so we have a purple structure, which is our reference structure. We have a green structure, which is what we call our treatment structure. We can easily see that we can set up to the region that we're treating. So this is kind of an arms up, SGRT lung or breast or abdomen, any type of those types of treatment we're used to seeing. We can see that we're getting 6 DOF corrections here. We're more inclined to look at the area that we're treating, but we can see outside of the field very easily that there's some postural issues with this patient. We can then evaluate inside of the treatment area, how well are we conforming to that treatment area to within some tolerance. We can use these analysis tools to kind of see, is that postural problem actually creating some sort of problem within the treatment site? We can also look at things in case of arms up, but you have a chin up. So say you have a high apical lesion, or you're using a supraclavicular field and you want the chin up and out of the field. It's not necessarily the treatment site, but it is very important that we're not shooting in through that treatment area. So you can look, and in this case, the head is not turned appropriately, so that we can make an adjustment and then look and see if that adjustment comes back into play. We can also go back and look at the other ROIs and make sure that we haven't changed the treatment area as well. All of this, again, is going back to what we would do. We've all had extremities where we have the 3 tattoos on the leg so that we have the right rotational tolerances and it's in the right position. You have the tattoo on the forearm, and I'm not talking in the microphone, sorry. Here and here to make sure you have the correct bend of the arm. So we're all used to those things. So here's another one where the arm, one arm is correct, the other arm is incorrect. You can easily see that from the ROI and the green treatment surface, but you can also look at it from a heat map standpoint and say, is this patient's posture in the right position? And so we can go ahead and correct those things. So now that we understand that surface guidance is nothing magical that's happening here, we're looking at surfaces. Now we can run. Nobody cares anymore. Man. So now we're moving along. So we're going to talk about what are the clinical and practical applications of SGRT and what can we actually treat with this. And so Dawn, this one's for you. That's the tree, and there's Phil. That one's for you too, Phil. If I don't put this in all my talks, I get heckled. If I put it in all my talks, I get heckled. So I lose in all aspects. We call this the tree of complexity. As you move up this tree, the treatments get more complex. The accuracy requirements get more and more stringent. You also have to look at different applications of your quality management program. But the nice thing that we like about SGRT at our facilities is that we are tasked with standardization and reduction in variation across all of our radiation oncology facilities. A good example with the simple, intermediate, and complex. If you have a palliative whole brain, if you have a partial brain, green right there, or a trigeminal neuralgia case at our center, you use the exact same immobilization, use the exact same SGRT setup procedure, and you have the exact same treatment time. It does not matter in any of those cases, and that is not necessarily the case in other facilities. And so we have a 15-minute time slot for all 3 of those cases. We have the exact same immobilization mask, and we have the exact same SGRT process. And the reason why we can do that is we no longer have a system that we dust off. The SBRT, when we have an SBRT, we dust off the SRS because those patients are getting SRS. They deserve SRS tolerances. Every single patient, after the physicist commissions these systems, get the SRS tolerances that you commission the system for. So it's basically a system that starts at the top, and basically everyone propagates that accuracy back down the tree. And so no matter what you're implementing this for, you actually get the benefit of the most technical, most accurate implementation that you have as you move back down that tree to other things. So if someone's getting a palliative, large field electron, we will actually capture that as a palliative case. We have a number of cases that are incidental findings after they fall and break a bone, so they're in lots of pain. So we'll set them up, capture a reference service, and they get that same setup every day to the same SRS precision that we would. Now, we aren't going to hold them to a 1 millimeter tolerance for an electron treatment, but in many cases, we have very small electron fields that we're treating on faces and inner canthus of the eye or the crease of the nose. And if you have a mentally handicapped patient or a patient that is partially demented or suffering from Alzheimer's, you can set up this very small field, but as soon as you leave the room, if they're talking and that field's going everywhere, you're not treating it. And so we use that even for electrons. And so everyone gasps in horror and dismay when I say that, but I didn't hear from you guys. So our initial observations, and I'm going to go back here because I don't want to mess this up and screw this up for everybody, but our initial observations after implementing SGRT were that we originally thought this was going to be one of our SRS tools, or this is going to be a deep inspiration breath hold tool. What we observed is that it has the potential to provide information to more effectively treat a wider variety of patients more accurately and efficiently. We can use this to objectively review and improve our current processes. So it's an observer-based pattern, so we can monitor not only what we're doing, but how well we're doing it at site A versus site B, because we're getting this influx of an enormous amount of data on all of these things. So we can see where our training needs are, and we can improve our processes that way. It has an implication beyond just treatment, and it can be used as a means to customize and evaluate our immobilization, our process that we use to treat patients, and it can be used to minimize the impact of treatment on the patients on a day-to-day fashion. So we can increase safety, we can increase quality, which in the past meant more rigid immobilization, more adding things to the patient. Now we're removing things from the patient, adding them to more of a comfort level and treating them in a more rapid fashion. And so we have increased patient satisfaction, but we're also increasing safety at the same time. We're not sacrificing one for the other. One of the things that we tie into SGRT now at our facility is SafeRT. SafeRT, and if you couldn't notice before, we use AlignRT at our facilities after all of our evaluation. But SafeRT now ties into our primary, secondary, and tertiary verification requirements. So we have a primary verification of the patient on the TrueBeam. They are secondarily verified when we open them up in the connectivity through the MMI through AlignRT. So the name, the birth date, the ISO center, and the plan are all verified secondarily on the AlignRT. And now when we check in a patient using SafeRT, the actual patient in the room, the actual immobilization equipment that's in the room, and the patient who's standing there is now tertiarily verified against AlignRT, which was then against the TrueBeam. And so we have 3 levels of verification of each patient without adding any additional requirements to our staff. It's very quick and easy. They walk past the facial recognition camera, they look at the camera, and it flashes green to let them know they're there. It takes about 30 seconds. And we always put that in a place where they're already going to stop, where they're putting their keys down, where they're taking their shoes off, something like that. And so it's very quick and easy. The setup devices are easily registered, as I said. It improves the patient experience. We have a lot of patients who don't want us to use their names in front of other patients. We also have a lot of patients who have very similar or exactly the same last names because of where we are. And so it's a very HIPAA compliant system. We're allowed to walk up to them with the handhelds. We can see them on the picture on the handheld. We can say, could you come with us? And then if we get to a more private environment, we can have more of a conversation with them. And then it's completely contactless. It complies with all of our hospital's infection control policies. So our hospital really, really likes that. The areas where I like the systems and things where I would like to see the usage of SGRT just behind setup and motion management expand is the customization of care. It provides insight into the quality of a patient-specific device fabrication. So now we can look at how well we're doing on our fabrication of our devices, not just assume we make every mask the same way and they're all good. Facilitating both patient and site-specific tolerance as well. Something that we like to evolve over time. As staff gets better and better at doing something, the tolerances should get tighter and tighter to avoid type 1 and type 2 errors. A good example of this, I use this in all of my talks. This is a pre-treatment QA on a Phantom up here. This is the actual treatment of the patient over here for an SRS. You can see that they look eerily similar. We are able to basically predetermine what our margins are and if they're adequate by doing a pre-treatment QA on an anthropomorphic Phantom. And then we can actually look at and then evaluate through a 1D feature registration of the 2 tasks and say, okay, this patient behaved exactly like the Phantom, so all of the margins that we predetermined were adequate for that patient. So we can now set patient-specific margins. If you have a patient who has a motor cortex met, you can set them up in the device you fabricated them in, put them on the couch, run them through a set of 5 templated couch positions, and determine whether or not that mask is rigidly adhering to the protocol that you have set for them. Because if they have a motor cortex met and they have an involuntary motion, they may require additional PTV margin that you don't put on someone else. And so now we can look ahead and predict future states of patients before the patient is actually on the table, and we have to decide on the fly, did the plan account for this type of variability? The other thing you can do is if you have SBRT, and this is something that I really like, we have SBRT here. The patient comes in, if we do an immobilization that is non-standard, we can actually bring them in for a dry run, put them in the immobilization, run them through the treatment plan, just without delivering beam, but just run them through the gantry angles, the couch positions, look at this and do an analysis and say, okay, the magnitude, 95.6% of the time they're within a 3 millimeter margin, 98.3% of the time they're within a 5 millimeter margin. Is that enough margin for us? If we don't like how the device is working, we can either refabricate the device and resimulate the patient, or we can adjust our margins appropriately for this specific patient in this particular circumstance, not on our ideal commissioning patient. And so these are all valuable things to know on patients that have lots and lots of retreats. We do a lot of retreat SBRT where they failed outside of the field at another institution or something like that. And so it's really good to know how well you're doing within your process and basically using this data to further improve your process or increase your training as you bring on additional treatment sites at other institutions that may not do this as often. The other thing that I really like, and this is kind of where I'm starting to focus my efforts, is in data-driven immobilization. We're all very familiar with the full-faced head and neck masks. We found that we could replan head and necks much less if we keep the posture correct. So the C-spine curvature, the base of skull position, all of that. The weight loss is far less of a dosimetric impact on these patients because we're delivering with VMAT. So you're going through very few monitored units through the areas where you're seeing weight loss. So you don't see as much of an impact as long as the posture is correct. So we thought, well, can we correct the C-spine curvature and reduce the amount of replanning that we're doing? So we went to open face masks. Then we went to these because we're like, well, now we're correcting the C-spine. Now we can kind of correct the shoulders. Let's give another mask that we can put them in a nice, comfortable position, but also be able to adjust their shoulders. So we did that. Now we're at this. This is not an endorsement for you to try this, please. I showed this data in another talk and got hate mail like you wouldn't believe. This is what we're calling maskless head and necks. So we basically have posterior mobilization. We have a small chin strap mask only on this posterior mobilization. It's relatively loosely fitting. It's only there to give the patient a reference of where the chin needs to be. So you don't have to fight a lot of time setting them up with the roll. So you get them in that reference mask, and then you set them up using SGRT all at the other locations. What this means, does this mean we can go completely maskless? We're gonna have to look at the data and find out. Our future is unknown at the moment. But this is a head and neck patient treated like this. This is where we treat the patient. We set them up initially with that head position, getting the C-spine in the correct position. We switch to a larger ROI to get the gross rotational setup of the shoulders. Because shoulders can move independently of one another, we like to look at each individual shoulder, make sure the shoulders are in the right position, and then we take a real quick set of KV images. You can see this is a KV image. This required a 1 millimeter lateral shift, but you can look at the clavicles, you can see the chin, the base of skull, the C-spine. I even did this for you. Look at that. It's just like being in front of an OBI, isn't it? That is some serious technical skill right there. And so basically this patient required a 1 millimeter shift after just setting them with SGRT, and they were completely maskless without that chin strap, essentially. This is what I call the way too early to tell table. That's my disclaimer. Again, don't do this without finding some numbers. We are looking at essentially full mask, partial mask, chin strap mask, all of them within the realm of being statistically the same, essentially. So we only did the 4 because when we had full mask, we didn't have a perfect pitch couch, so we're only looking at the 4 degrees of freedom. So essentially our residual shift after setup with SGRT is essentially, these are our average cone beam shifts after setup. The next thing we look at are patients, going to patient satisfaction and patient safety. This patient is a lymphoma patient. This patient had been hit by a car, so she has pain issues, a bad neck and spine. She has a frozen contralateral shoulder. She has a very large breast augmentation and presented with a lymphoma mass that traveled from behind the ear on the outside of the neck down into the axilla, requiring a VMAT delivery to spare the amount of lung volume that would have been required to treat this patient. Could not lay for very long. And so you can imagine the difficulty of trying to get someone with all of these conditions into position. What we did is we created basically the same thing we do for a head and neck, but removed the contralateral shoulder, got a gross positional setup. We moved to the shoulder. We then moved to the arm. We actually then moved to the chin, but I forgot to put that in here for you. So then we went to our KVs. We take a single set of KVs. You can see that a 3 millimeter shift is required, but if you look at the alignment on the ipsilateral side, as I stretch back here, you can see the clavicle, the chest wall, the neck, and the chin positions are all in place. We're requiring only a 3 millimeter shift. You can also see the frozen contralateral shoulder is slightly out of alignment, but we didn't use VMAT arcs to travel onto that side of the body, so we weren't concerned about that. We were able to treat this patient in about 10 to 15 minutes in a standard time slot without her being able to lay there. We could also check the immobilization after we created it, put her on the machine and said, okay, we're shooting for 15 minutes. We're gonna monitor you in this position to see if you can hold it. So we knew ahead of time what she could tolerate and whether or not the immobilization was gonna be adequate for the margins we were gonna use for these large VMAT fields. So I tell everyone that when you're evaluating SGRT systems, you really need to hold the vendor to giving you an example of, can this work for whatever you're asking for? In Europe, for example, they ask for a tender where you provide a number of sites that say, we're doing this, and if you have questions, we can prove that this is happening in our center. And so in the spirit of that, when talking about SRS, this is a 4 millimeter fourth ventricular met. This lady also has a meningioma that we're tracking. So we have the ability to see the SRS plan over here. This is what her planning scan looked like. This is her first follow-up scan. You can see the radiological scarring on the MRI. Again, in the vermis, about 6 months later, you can now see the radiological scar, but nothing going on in the brainstem. And this is her most current MRI that we're looking at for SRS of the meningioma. And you can see that there's no scarring of the brainstem. We've actually been able to basically center punch a 4mm MET using an HDMLC and SGRT. And this was using SGRT, not cone beam, to recorrect the couch if she moved. And so the system is very, very accurate. Another way we look at it, we do trigeminal neuralgia almost weekly at one of our institutions with 4mm cones using the ICVI system. This is a great article on trigeminal neuralgia on Gamma Knife and what you can expect from a radiological standpoint after treating Gamma Knife. And this, please forgive me, is from the paper, so the image quality is fantastic. Up here is what the plan looked like, 90 gray single shot. Follow-up scans show a hyper-intense signal on the trigeminal nerve. So we thought, hey, we're doing this trigeminal neuralgia with SGRT. Are we doing the same thing? So this is one of our trigeminal neuralgia patients. Again, the nerve from the planning scan, and here's a follow-up scan that we are doing now, tracking some other radiological changes from other SRSs, and we can see the hyper-intense signal on that 4mm cone plan. And so we can show that these systems are accurate, that we can show that it's capable of delivering what it needs to do. And I believe that when you're evaluating systems, you really need to seek out users and papers and data, things like what Paul's going to share, that show that this is actually capable with the system that you're trying to do. So what does this mean for our patients? We're currently treating 100% of our patient census using SGRT. They are all completely tattooless. We do not tattoo our patients at all for any indication. The setups are quick, accurate, reliable. The identification system is tied into the SGRT system as a tertiary verification for our patients, so it's quick and easy on our patients. There's more accurate setups now. We can now check postural issues long before we do IGRT. If you're used to seeing your therapist run in and out of the room to get the arm in the right place as they do that sweet roboto dance with the KV images, trying to get the arm position in the exact right place for the MV port, I'm sure you will be a hero showing them that you can do this very quickly and easily. The short, more efficient treatment times, lower dose to critical structures because of DIBH. We are using DIBH more broadly than we originally intended because we're now able to do it for SBRT and a number of other indications because of the effectiveness of the system. And so you can take DIBH that you intended for left-sided breast and move it to right-sided breast, and then you can move it from left and right-sided breast to SBRT and a number of other indications. And so that SBRT for lymphoma in the chest and those types of things are giving us much more advantage of reducing the normal dose to other critical structures. The constant monitoring before, during, and after imaging. So we're now correcting posture before imaging. We're monitoring the patient during imaging to make sure they're not moving, that cone beam is still valid, and then we're also monitoring them after to make sure they're not moving away from that intended position. And then finally, the continuous process quality improvement aspect. There's so many more that I couldn't fit into this really narrow talk. I'd be happy to talk about later on. But for us, SGRT is changing how we do radiation oncology at Centura Health because it is harnessing the information that it provides. It provides a glut of information to us, so we're using that to more effectively treat wider varieties of patient treatment sites. We're enabling us to objectively review and improve our current treatment process, not only just the treatment process, but our ability to execute that process. So going into the next point, to develop some more informed planning margins for our dosimetrists, but also we can evaluate an end-to-end plan or staff quality metric where if we're delivering, say, DIBH at one institution and we bring on DIBH at another institution, we have an objective way to compare how DIBH is going between the two institutions. Are we delivering the same standard of care, or do we have some variability across institution? And those are the types of metrics that we're going to start being asked to track, because if you're delivering and you're getting payments for these one-time deliveries, you want to make sure that you're both efficient and effective at all of your institutions and that your training is up to date at all of those institutions. And so it's helping us minimize the impact of treatment on our patients while still maintaining that safety and quality for each and every fraction. So that is the big part of the big picture talk. The concepts that I was asked to just really kind of briefly go through are the concepts for reviewing an SGRT system. When we review an SGRT system, it's largely going to be based on what your focus is at your clinic, but we look at market share and mostly market share peer review, so the number of users available to an institution to really bounce ideas off of and compare data against and those types of things. The user-based references, things like the SGRT community that they have, and those types of things are really appealing to new users because you are trying to get your program off the ground. And there is a huge tribal set of knowledge that doesn't always get published that is available from those users. And so that's why we do our reviews so often. And then obviously outcome publications. There's DIBH publications and SRS publications and a number of other publications that you can go to show that this technology delivers the outcomes that we would expect. DIBH, we've talked about it. The only thing I really want to talk about DIBH, if you're using these systems for DIBH, you really need to remember that we use plan reference as gold standards in radiation oncology. If you're taking ports, you're using DRRs. If you're doing cone beam CTs, you're using reference CTs. You really need to have a plan reference DIBH approach, and that is not the case with all vendors. And so you really need to look at what is your DIBH workflow, what do you plan on doing, and if you're going to implement it, is it done in the way that you're used to it happening in radiation oncology. If it's not plan reference, you need to come up with a way to kind of work around that idea and link that back to the plan. The clean, easy workflows for DIBH just kind of goes to, there are some vendors that are literally hard-coded for breast, and if you've commissioned your system for breast, that's great, but doing DIBH for SGRT brings into other confounding factors when you're trying to image, especially on variant platforms where you have couch centering. So now you need a couch-centered DIBH reference surface, and how does that happen? How do you get that center position at DIBH and not at isocenter? You really need to look at how the vendor handles that, because there are some really clunky and atrocious workarounds that need to happen in some of the vendors' softwares. So that's up to you to decide whether or not that's adequate for you. Registration tools, this is the big one for us at Centura. There's rigid registration and deformable registration out there. There's consequences to those types of registration. You really need to understand what those consequences are, what that means for your analysis tools, what that means for your QA, what that means for your quality management program, because there's some information that you need to know. And talking to just people today, like I said, there's more and more things that I learn every day. The more I engage with other people that have other systems, just little intricacies that you just don't really pick up, and having that user base to really talk to them is really important. The analysis tools goes to the registration type. So you saw the analysis tools with all the posture evaluation we did on the early slides, looking at arm position, head position, treatment area position, being able to apply couch corrections as far as interfacing with the machine. We'll talk about accuracy measures. You really need to look at absolute accuracy. Paul's talk is going to talk about that. Camera calibration, how that calibration is done. What are the steps for that calibration? What does it mean daily, monthly? Isocenter calibration, radiographic calibration, all the different calibrations, how are they linked together and how do those happen? What is the consequence of it? What does that really mean to the physicist? Camera calibration, absolute accuracy, how do you measure that? Can you verify that specification? And then again, proper workflows. Your system in your sites have different workflows than my sites, so you really want to look at multiple isocenter support. Phil and I were talking earlier about multiple isocenter breasts versus single isocenter breasts if you have an HDMLC. So you really need to look at that, multiple ROI support, 4D CT support, and gating, whether you're doing gating on all 6 degrees of freedom or 70. Some of the systems have time parameters that we use extensively. In fact, we use time parameters on all of our gating cases. So if they're out of tolerance by a certain amount of time, that's when we gate the beam, not just instantly when the parameters are violated. And then integration with CTs, integration with Linux, we've talked about. You'll see things specified that say we are compatible with all vendors. If you don't connect to any of them, that's technically true. So just, kind of dig what that means when you say compatible with everything, please. Make sure that when it says compatible, it's compatible in the sense that you want it to be compatible, because I have had people call me and said they said it was compatible and it won't connect. And so the one that everyone misses is compatible or integrates with your existing IT infrastructure. Some of these systems do not run on standard Windows. They don't run on OSs that are standard for a lot of IT departments. Some of them run on OSs that are not supported anymore and require ongoing maintenance service contracts. And so you really need to check with your IT department, make sure they're part of it. We do what's called a TEQ, or a technical evaluation questionnaire, where we run through our IT. We're high-tech certified and a number of other things. So certain things are allowed into our network on our base network, and certain things aren't. So you don't want to pick a favorite and then find out you can't use it. Customizable into the level that you want it to customize. think about what your workflows are, think about the patient safety concerns that you have and how you want it to integrate into your network and into your machine and into your workflow, and make sure you're testing those points repeatedly. Make sure you understand the QA that's needed to make sure that all of those integration points are checked. And so that's just a real quick set of concepts that I tell everyone you really should kind of look for. It's not just who has the coolest booth at Astro, or who has the flashy lights and this, that, and the other thing, because that's not necessarily what wins the day in the clinic. So, and I think with that, that's the end of mine. So